Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Enablement Brew podcast. I'm Carly Lehner.
And I'm Malvina, and we're so excited you're joining us for our third episode of 2023. And we have an incredible guest today on the show, Udi Ledergor, CMO at Gong. And we're so excited to dive into the conversation. But before we do, the question that we ask everyone is, what's in your mug?
Well, I hope I won't disappoint, but it's just a glass of water. I'm after my second or third espresso, so I do those tiny little espressos throughout the day, but it's mostly water for me.
Carly?
I have our Enablement Brew mug, and I am on herbal tea. So I have a peppermint tea at the moment. It's been a while since I've had a non-caffeine tea. I decided why not today. So
You're extending the holiday spirit.
Yes.
Well, I'll top you one because I have a herbal infusion.
Oh, okay.
First time ever in my mug. But Udi, we're so excited you're joining us. And 2023 for a lot of companies is probably going to be a very interesting year. There's lots of talk about volatility, uncertainty, maximizing efficiency, becoming more effective. How is Gong helping customers embrace all of that and actually become more efficient, become more effective, and become better at what they do? Because let's face it, it's all about buyer enablement, having better conversations with our buyers, more seamless conversations, which isn't always very easy to do. What's Gong's take on that?
Absolutely, and I'm happy to chat about this for any length of time you'll have me. So Gong not only helps companies with all of what you said, but especially in a fast-moving environment like now, where companies are expected to have less wiggle room than we had this last year and the previous year, where the environment and economy were frothy and companies were in default growth mode. That's not the case anymore, and companies are contracting now, and they're trying to understand very quickly what's working, what's not, how they need to change that, and whether those changes are having the effect that they want, and if not, pivot away to do something else. And Gong is the perfect platform to help companies figure those strategic initiatives out. So I'll give you a quick example. Even at Gong, we're constantly revisiting our messaging, our pricing and packaging, our sales decks and materials. And whenever we roll those out, in the old world, companies without the Reality platform by Gong, they would roll something out and 6 months later, start to survey the sales team. So have you been using the new sales deck? And they go, yeah. And how's that been going? Oh, it's great. A few customers really liked it. And then you don't really know who's using it and what's the effect of using the new messaging, the new deck, the new pricing and packaging. But with Gong, as soon as we roll out something new, we set up a tracker for it at Gong. We look at it on a daily basis if we want to, or get a weekly report. So I know that Kevin's team is 80% using the new deck. Justin's team is only 40% using. So I should go talk to him and see whether his team needs some reinforcement training. And not only do we see who's using the new materials or narrative that we're putting out there, but we also see the efficacy of the new initiative. So I can tell that the reps using the new messaging are winning deals at a 39 higher percentage point win rate. So I can use that to reinforce and say, you've got to be crazy not to use this because it's actually working. Now, not everything we roll out is going to work, but sometimes when you roll out something, you want to know fast that you failed so you can stop doing that. You don't want to make things worse and then go pivot to do something else. So those are just some of the ways that we're helping our customers be prepared for the economy, give their buyers a better experience, and make sure that they're touching on the value areas that their buyers are most interested in right now.
I totally prescribe to all of that. Like we actually are going through a very similar exercise at the moment where we're having our whole team go through recertification because we want to figure out like what messaging is working, how well do they do with the messaging, and then we can kind of track once we give them that feedback, how are they implementing the new changes in those conversations without having to constantly go through a recertification process. Like live calls, I think, are the gold standard to use because role plays can be really scary. But we use Gong in full transparency to do the certification. So the scorecards that you guys have are really helpful for those environments as well. So it is really great how Gong can help customers connect better with the buyer because you can go back and listen.
Yes.
So one of the things that I really love about Gong, again, in full transparency, is the social media presence that you guys have on LinkedIn. And as a buyer myself, I tend to value companies when I'm going to market looking for things to buy. I look at their content a lot of the time. And that's typically how I decide who I want to talk to. And Gong I've noticed, has really strong content, and the stats that you guys have, because you sit on all of this data. So because you have all this data, what kinds of trends do you guys see in the market? And especially like, what are your anticipations for 2023?
So yeah, first of all, thank you for the compliments. We have an amazing content and social team run by Jordan and Nehal on the social part, and they're doing an amazing job there. And I do agree with you, which was our premise when we got started doing this over 6 years ago, that content makes a huge difference in the buying decision. I've had countless customers tell us that, not only did they buy us because we have the superior product, but our thought leadership and content and social strategy were a big part of that, because they knew about us long before they were in the market to buy a product. And unlike some obnoxious vendors that just pitch their product all day long, we actually provide value in pretty much everything that we post and send out by email or on social media. And I think that's still a penny drop moment for many companies that they need to have. Social media is not your brochure. Not everyone who follows you on social media is ready to buy. And making that assumption and only talking about yourself and the product is not going to get you very far. And still, if you look at most companies' LinkedIn profiles, they're just posting about their next product webinar and their latest product release and the new product feature. There's only so much of that you can take. And at Gong, we've always believed that everything that we send to a customer, whether it's an email or a social media post, we need to look at through the lens of, would I want to consume this as a prospect or a customer? Does it truly add value to my day? And if not, just don't post it. So we never have a quota of like, oh, we have to get a post out at 9 a.m. If we don't have a good one, we're not going to post anything. If we have a weekly email scheduled, but the Gong Labs research is going to take another week to complete, we'll wait another week and we'll make sure we get that useful research out so that when we send you something, you'll read it and go, wow, this actually gave me an idea I can go try on my team right now. And we often get those responses of, I'll give a funny example. We tested everything from what's a better call opener. Should you start with how are you or how have you been? What will keep the prospect on for longer? Can you take a guess if you haven't read the research piece? How are you or how have you been? Malvina, you say how have you been? Carly, what do you say?
That would be my guess, and I have not read the research.
Well, you're both right, but most people use the other one. Most people start with how are you, while how have you been? We've seen in the data, analyzing millions of calls, that it's a much better pattern disruptor and gives the other person on the call the vague feeling that they should know you. Because if you ask them, how have you been? It kind of alludes to maybe we've talked before or crossed paths. So they will stop what they're doing, and rather than the automatic, who is this? Why are you calling? They'll go, I've actually been doing okay. Remind me. Yeah, we'll start a conversation. So we publish everything from things like that to the more complex. We had a really interesting piece that got a lot of discussion about it, where we showed that salespeople who occasionally swear and curse on their sales calls can have a 8% higher win rate on their deals. This is scientifically proven. And we triple tested that to validate our assumptions and data, but it's actually true. And as you can imagine, it's created a whole shitstorm, pardon my French, on social media, with radio stations calling us for comments and fastcompany.com running with the story. And we couldn't buy that publicity if we wanted to. So we put a lot of work into this research. And that's one way that we provide value, but value can take many forms. Sometimes all people want while they're scrolling their social media at work is just a funny meme or a video to distract them for a second and lighten up their day between all the rejection that salespeople get all day from their prospects and customers not picking up. So we encourage our employees to post on social media, and we sometimes amplify their posts on our company profile just to share the whatever it is, the holiday spirit, the end of month anxiety, the beginning of the quarter blues, whatever it is, to provide some distraction and fun. We call it edutainment. Didn't make up the term, but it's really the combination of education and entertainment, which is what we're all looking for when we're browsing our social media. So it doesn't always have to be deadly serious. You don't need to post those 40-page white papers every week. Nobody's probably reading them except your competitor anyway. So you might as well post something that actually lightens up someone's day and adds value there.
I love that. I'm sure a lot of sellers listening to this episode now are thinking, okay, I'm going to incorporate the next F word into my discovery.
So
right?
if you want the 30-second extension on that, what we found in our research where that is really effective is when it's used as a mirroring technique of the customer. So if you're talking to a customer and the customer drops an F-bomb or uses the S word, first, they're indicating that this is how they're comfortable communicating. And then, just like we were all taught that if you're in an interview, your interviewer crosses their arms or legs, you should do the same. This is another form of mirroring. So you should carefully do that in a not too obvious way. Use the kind of same type of language. When you do that, you create better rapport and you have a likelier chance of closing that deal. How much more likely? 8% more likely.
That's incredible. I wonder how all the parents are feeling, if we rewind back to COVID, right? Working at home, having little ones, run around the house and then hearing the F-bomb every now and again. Definitely.
I mean, they've heard it on YouTube far before they heard it on their parents' Zoom calls.
Spoiler alert, Malvina, your kids have probably heard it.
Yeah, with a 10-year-old at home, I get questions on words I didn't think they'd be hearing so soon.
-7, so I'm worried what's coming. Udi, I absolutely love that. And you're right. I think content has to be so thoughtful and meaningful because, to your point, white papers are great, but who actually reads that 25, 50-page white paper that maybe your marketing team has dedicated hours and hours to, right? And we often hear like LinkedIn is becoming the #1 platform or is the #1 platform for sellers, for professionals. And it does have a little bit of the scrolling vibe now, right? You will scroll and you will maybe pause for 30 seconds or 1 minute on a post that really catches your attention. And I do have to say, every time I scroll through Gong's posts, I'm like, oh, love that. That made me laugh. That made me giggle. So amazing.
The social team would love hearing that.
Incredible. So Gong recently released, and this goes back to our first question, which is all around the uncertainty in the markets. And Gong recently released the forecasting functionality. Can you tell us more about that? Why did we decide to go down that particular route?
So, sellers today, they spend, I think the last stat I read is they only spend like 23% of their time on actual selling activities, talking with customers and moving a deal forward. They spend 77% of their time on non-selling activities. One of those big time wasters is preparing for their forecast meeting. So they'll meet with their manager and they'll do a one-on-one account review, and then they'll give their best guesstimate of what's going to close and what's likely and what's best case. And then the manager does the same with all of their reps, and then they do that with their director, and then the director does that with the VP, and the VP does that with the CRO. So that we surveyed our customers, and they spend a ridiculous amount of hours a week preparing for their forecast, and most of them admit that it's not as accurate, not nearly as accurate as they'd like it to be. And so we listened and we said, okay, instead of wasting all this time to end up with an inaccurate forecast, and you're also using a bunch of spreadsheets and different tools to even get there, what if we just took all those great conversations you're already capturing in Gong, all the deals that you already have clear warnings on what needs intervention in order to close, what's seemingly on track, and just add that layer of forecasting so you could easily roll up your forecast and do it in minutes rather than hours. And customers were so excited. We launched this in July of last year. In the first 100 days, we had over 100 paying customers sign up and buy this for their entire team, because like this is gold. This is exactly what they needed. Instead of doing all those manual spreadsheets where every company admitted to have multiple spreadsheets that don't even agree with each other on what the forecast is, just use all this gold mine of conversations that they already have in Gong, quickly update based on the deal warnings and the likelihood of the deal and what Gong is saying is actually going to happen, and have that roll up automatically all the way up to the CRO. And so we now have way over 100 customers, because it's been 6 months or so since then. But this has really been going like hotcakes, I guess you could say, because especially during volatile times like this, companies found that using the traditional linear models of saying, hey, we know that like halfway through the quarter, we're probably a quarter into our quota attainment, and this much is going to be left to the 2 weeks in the end. Those models go out the window when the economy is so unpredictable like it is right now, because those linear models assume a predictability and repetitiveness of one quarter to another. And I think we've all seen in the last 2 to 3 quarters that nothing has been repeating itself and nothing has been predictable. And so now you really need that bottoms up forecast that takes into account where each deal is actually at this moment, and not assuming this aggregate tops down model that maybe works during peacetime definitely does not work during wartime.
Yeah. And I mean, Gong looks really closely at the interactions between the seller, between the buyer, the emails that are taking place, what's being said, right? So you're able to really monitor the trends of what's happening in that conversation. Is there another step sometime maybe in the future where we're also looking at things like facial recognition? You know, potentially someone gives you a particular look and maybe they're saying one thing, but actually their body language and their demeanor means something completely different.
Yeah, that's a exciting topic, Malvina. We took a look, and there's some products out there that do things like sentiment analysis, and we put out in beta some capabilities a while ago that did something like that within Gong. What we found is that because many of our customers are in a B2B space, so it's one company buying from another company, the fluctuations that you get in sentiment and facial expressions are not nearly as broad as you would in a B2C situation. I'll give you an example. If my internet provider messes up and I call them, I might get very excited in that conversations, and I might be very expressive in that conversation and threaten to go to a competitor or just hang up on them, et cetera. So these things typically happen, especially on support lines, right? If someone's calling about a lost package or about a utility that's out, things can get heated very quickly. We found that doesn't happen nearly as much in a B2B circumstance, because you're calling to buy software or someone's calling to pitch you software, and things tend to be very neutral throughout the conversation. So in those situations, reading someone's face or expression or even tone of voice is not nearly as useful as it might be in a B2C situation. So I think those technologies are more helpful when someone's calling a support center and they're clearly upset, and the call center wants to alert maybe the supervisor, like, you want to come in with a really attractive deal right now before this customer leaves you, then that might be a place where it adds value. For B2B, which represents most of Gong's customers, we didn't find that nearly as useful.
Oh, love that.
That's super interesting. Because I'm sure that's something that you could probably say to people and they would think, oh, that's super sexy technology. How cool would that be? But it's nice that Gong has kind of done some research on that. It's like, it actually doesn't move the needle that much. It's more of like a flashy thing. And
there's a lot of these things in this space, Carly. You're absolutely right. One thing that every couple of years, some vendor thinks they've reinvented the wheel, and they come out and say, oh, we can do real-time guidance for your sellers right now, where while they're talking to the prospect, we'll flash these battle cards at them and tell them, say this and do that. And here's the LinkedIn profile of the prospect you're talking to. It sounds kind of sexy and useful, right? The problem is nobody likes it. Nobody likes it. Nobody uses it. Every vendor that launched that either dropped it altogether or just pushed it somewhere sideways, because nobody wants to use it, especially in a B2B environment, because usually the case is you have a seasoned seller who's having a face-to-face conversation like we're having right now over Zoom. And can you imagine the distraction if you now have a bunch of windows popping up saying, hey, Udi really likes single malt whiskeys. You should ask him about this. Oh, and he also plays the piano and he has 3 children. And you should offer him this end of quarter deal and make sure he's not upset about that thing. Like, you would just close that thing altogether because it is so distracting. And it almost undermines your skills and experience. You've been doing this for years, Carly. You know what you're doing. You know how to have a human conversation. You will do your research before you get on the call with the prospect, and you will analyze what you could have done better after the call and maybe prepare and do follow-up for the next call. But the last thing you want is all these windows jumping up at you with cards that at best are somewhat relevant and many times are just going to pop up a bunch of things that you would never think of mentioning on the call. And that's what's happened with that capability that other vendors have started using. They've never succeeded, and we've just never gone in that area because we talk to customers, and as soon as they thought about it, they said, like, yeah, my sellers would never use that. They would hate that. So we just spend our time elsewhere.
Yeah. That's so funny that you say that, because I've also thought like that could be really cool in theory until you actually think about it, and a rep would just absolutely hate that. But so one of the things that we always tell our sellers is every great sports personality, every amazing musician always has to practice. They always have to watch game film. They have to watch back a previous recital or the last time they played their upcoming competitor. Sales is no different. Sales is a art and a science, and you get better with, debriefing from your last calls, preparing for your future calls. And so the art and the practice of actually listening back to a call is like, should be a part of everyone's repertoire. So how do you guys at Gong suggest to sellers, like, this is how you should listen to calls? Because sometimes people might not have the 30 minutes to listen to an entire call, but they still should be able to learn something from their previous conversations or their peers' conversations. So how do you guys kind of suggest learning from yourself and others?
So before I answer that, Carly, let me validate your assumption, because we've done the research and it clearly shows without fail that sellers who listen to more calls, whether they're their own calls after the effect or their peers' calls, sellers who ask for more feedback on their calls from peers and managers, and sellers who provide feedback on other sellers' calls, those are the ones who truly excel. And it's so predictive that it's ridiculous. You can just open up a Gong dashboard, see, rank my team from top to bottom, who's listened to the most calls in the last 90 days, and those are going to be your top sellers. Like, there's almost no other option. And so the data really supports, the science supports your intuition here. Now, how do we get to do that? So there's 2 main ways. First, once people set up their notification preferences in the product, we will surface to them calls that we think they should listen to. We will suggest that they ask for feedback on certain calls. Now, we don't want to be intrusive, so we'll send at most a daily email saying, like, here are your calls from yesterday. You may want to go back and follow up or ask for feedback on them, but we won't be more intrusive than that. The second way, which is truly, truly important, is how we partner through our customer success team with our customers. So the best thing to get your reps to listen to calls and ask for feedback is by doing it with them and making it part of the organizational culture. We've heard of customers where they have what they call Gong parties. So once a week, they'll get together. The reps will compete amongst themselves whose call gets dissected at this week's Gong party. They'll order pizzas and beer for the team, and then they'll listen to the call, stopping every 30 seconds and getting feedback. So what went well there? What could have she done a little bit better? What can we learn from this? And by the end of that 20 minutes or 30 minutes of dissecting that call, everyone has learned something new. Like, wow, she really handled that competitive objection so well. I'm going to use that next time. And then we make it super easy for organizations to create libraries that even we at Gong use internally for onboarding, but our best customers do this as well. So you can keep libraries of, this is how we talk about discounts when they're requested. This is how we talk about competitor X when they come up. And you can have a library of the funniest calls. We've got everything from people taking a call with a parrot on their shoulder. I'm not even kidding you. To one of our reps, Adam, being with his super poker face on a call when something actually blew up behind him in the room. So you want to keep a reel of these funny calls. They're always great for holiday parties, I promise you. But keeping those libraries of our best place and our worst place, like this is how you don't talk about the competitor and you don't disparage them and you don't say this. Keeping those will slash the onboarding time of your new reps by 50% guaranteed. And it just makes everyone better by curating these lists. You can add to them automatically if you want to, or just curate them manually and add and take away calls as you change your messaging and best practices. But really creating that organizational culture change is the best way to implement the understanding that the more you listen to calls, the more you ask for feedback, the better you get without fail.
I love that. And it's all about building that culture of learning. Always be learning, never stop. You can always learn something from someone else, and you need to have that openness and willingness to do that. So it's interesting. Both Carly and I, we consider Gong and any other tool that does conversational intelligence an enablement tool. It is an enablement tool that we utilize. We utilize daily. What's enablement like at Gong?
So Gong has an amazing enablement team run by our VP of Enablement, Nate Vogel, that serves the entire go-to-market team. So they run onboarding first and foremost for sales, but also for marketing and CSM and SDR and other roles. And he and Brandy, who's been here even before Nate, they do a great job of really customizing the materials that we need, not only to the times, because things change, obviously, and our priorities change. And this year we might need to focus more on competition, or next year we might need to focus more on the economy, but also to the different roles that they cater to. So they start with typically a 2-week onboarding program, and then it kind of splits off by different personas. And then there's the refreshes that happen on either a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. And of course, around sales kickoff, there's a big enablement effort that they're really busy with right now, as our sales kickoff is coming up next month. So it's a fantastic program. And again, one more shameless plug. I think Gong makes it so much easier for them because they can regularly review calls and take examples that really shine and showcase those to the entire organization. I mean, there's not probably 3 hours that pass during my life here at Gong without someone sharing a snippet of a call in a Slack channel or in an email and calling out someone saying, hey, look at the great job that Adam did here handling this competitive objection. We can all learn from that. And then you get 600 people clicking that, listening for 30 seconds and going, wow, I'm going to use that on my next call. That was brilliant. And there's just no faster, better way of incorporating the best and worst practices at scale.
Love that.
I always love to talk to other companies and figure out like how does their enablement team function? And obviously, like Malvina and I have this podcast, but it's even more interesting when companies who we consider our enablement companies or enablement products, how they do enablement as well.
You should totally talk with Nate and Brandy, and happy to make that connection if you need me to.
Always looking for guests on the podcast. So the last question we have for you, Udi, is so one of the things that we've unfortunately been seeing in with all the tech layoffs is enablement is being impacted by those layoffs pretty significantly. Obviously, Malvina and I are a bit biased because we are in enablement. We don't think enablement should be a part of those layoffs because enablement is a great team to help your existing team be effective. But because you sit on the C-suite and are part of, much larger conversations than just marketing, how does a C-suite typically view enablement? Are they aware of what enablement does? And how do you kind of look at the value that enablement brings? And I guess what advice would you give to other C-suite members who might be going through a downsizing effort and might look at enablement as a possible place to cut?
So I can tell you exactly how C-suite is thinking about enablement, but I'd actually like to direct my advice to the enablement teams, not to the C-suite. I'll explain. during times like this, when the economy is very trying and companies need to extend their runway and they might be strapped for cash. If they're early stage, they might not know when the next round is going to come in. If they're public or later stage, revenue might not be where they want it to be, or churn and downgrade might be higher. They look at going back to basics and looking at every large investment in the business and really thinking, and I'll quote my favorite CFO, Tim Ritters, who says, let's talk about the ROI. Everyone comes to me asking for the I, but nobody wants to come back and talk to me about the R. So that is exactly what the C-suite is looking for. Show me the R in ROI. Now, here's my advice for enablement. If you are not already set up with measurable goals that you can demonstrate periodically, at least on a quarterly level, and if you can do it more often than that, the better, but at least on a quarterly level, say, these are the enablement goals we set out for the team. Here's how we're doing on them. Here's what's going well. Here's what we could be doing better. And here's what we're going to do about it. Then you might get into trouble and you might find yourself in the sights of some of the cost reduction efforts. Now, again, I think our enablement team is a brilliant example of how they do that. They look at every major enablement effort and the resources that go into it, which is most of the time people, because our biggest investment in enablement and in marketing and in other teams is people. And they say, okay, we're going to throw 3 people at this task. Our goal is for the mid-market segment, we want to improve competitive win rates by 4% over the next quarter. Here's the efforts that we're going to make. And then they come back 3 months later and say, here's how the win rates have improved in the mid-market segment over the last 3 months. And here's how we're tying it back to our efforts. We did this many trainings. We did this many call reviews. We used Gong to do this and that. And we ended up with 3.5% improvement. So we're well on track. We're not quite there. We think we'll be, maybe a month or quarter later to that, but we're going to double down on doing that. And then other efforts are going to be, you know what? We made an investment. We took a bet. We failed. We haven't seen any significant change in that. So we're going to stop that effort and redirect our resources to where they're more needed right now. But that is how every team, and this is not unique to enablement, marketing goes under the same scrutiny, people go under the same scrutiny, engineering goes under the same scrutiny. What are your measurable goals for moving the business forward? Because as we're all reading and hearing around us, the markets and the investors are looking for companies who have a clear path to profitability, who are becoming more operationally efficient and productive. And enablement is not going to be off the hook. You have to play that game. And if this was not already demanded from you by your CFO or by your CEO, then you should take the initiative, Mrs. and Mr. Enablement, go and suggest measurable targets for your team, work back from them. What are the resources going in? That's the I. And what is the outcome? That is the R. And proactively come to your C-suite and show them that every 3 months, or even send out a monthly newsletter from enablement saying, this is what we focused on. These are our results to date. Let me know if you have any questions about our priorities. Do you think we should be working on something that you didn't see on the list? Should we be stopping something that you found here? And that's how you continue getting the resources that you need, by showing how you're moving the business forward.
I love that. And that is definitely something that Carly and we spoke at length on our previous episodes. So I'm glad to hear that we're all aligned here.
Yeah.
Let's end things on a high, because with challenges, there's always opportunities and there are always things to be excited about. What are you most excited, Udi, for 2023?
I think out of every economic downturn, there were great companies who came out. Household names like Netflix and Airbnb and many, many others came out of an economic downturn because they identified an opportunity, acted on it quickly, gave people what they really needed, or companies what they really needed, and continue to build and thrive from there. This one's going to be no different. There are going to be winners and losers in this economic downturn. We're already seeing some sectors doing well, some sectors doing not so well. And within each sector, we're going to see some consolidation. Those who run out of runway and don't grow as fast as they need to right now, they'll either shut down operations or get bought up by the bigger players. We can see a flux of M&A activity happening in the last few months. And every prediction I've read so far predicts a lot more of that happening in 2023. until investors start pouring money back into the markets, or companies can get liquidity by going public. But those windows seem closed for the near future. And so I think a lot of opportunities come specifically in our space of sales tech. Customers are looking to consolidate on fewer platforms, get better return on their investment, and have their reps working with fewer systems, getting more done. And I think that positions companies like Gong with a great opportunity at hand of showing the value, showing even more value, coming out with new innovative products that answer the exact customer needs at this time. And I look forward to see how we continue winning in the space. And it'll be interesting to see what everyone does. But yeah, I think there's lots of opportunities as long as you listen to your customers, give them exactly what they want right now at the price that they want it. Lead with empathy. Everyone's going through a hard time right now. So this is not a good time to, stick to your guns and not be flexible on things that maybe you could afford not to be flexible a year ago, but customers do have options now and they will use them right now. And so I would not rely on anyone's loyalty just because you're the biggest or the best known brand or anything like that. You've got to really lead with empathy and give them what they need now so they can get through this tough time and feel like you're the right partner to continue with.
That's great advice. Amazing advice. Love to hear that. All right. Well, Udi, thank you so much for joining us on the Enablement Brew. I thought this was a fantastic conversation and we were so happy to have you. And we would love to have your enablement team on as well. So would love an
happy to make that connection. Thank you so much for having me, Malvina and Carly. I really had fun.
Thanks everyone, and we'll see you next time.